All right, hello again and welcome to our third installment of the North Dakota Library Trustee Training. Today we get to talk about library ethics in general. So not even North Dakota specific, just librarianship in all of its good times. If you have any questions throughout, feel free to interrupt me or toss them into chat. I'll do my best to keep an eye on it. Like I put in the chat, we have our handy dandy LibGuide with everything that I mentioned today. You can download the slides and later the recordings will be available on here as well. You can get to the LibGuide either by going to the link, again in chat, or by accessing on our website. I am Abby Ebach, Public Library Specialist for the State Library for 3 years, and again, I'm not a lawyer. Anything I say is not legal advice, and please consult your local attorney with all of your legal questions. Hopefully we have no law questions today, because that would be very surprising to me. So let's dive right in. The foundations of librarianship can generally be found in 2 documents adopted by the American Library Association. The Library Code of Ethics was adopted in 1939, and it was most recently amended in 2008, so actually not that recent. The 8 articles in the Code of Ethics summarize the importance of equitable access to all library users, respect, intellectual freedom, privacy, confidentiality, copyright, advocacy, continuing ed, and then the importance of separating your personal beliefs with your professional duties, and in opposition to censorship. It's actually a really good document that you can read in its entirety, but a lot of that information is also in the Library Bill of Rights, which we will go into more in depth. So the Library Bill of Rights was also adopted in 1939, and it's only been amended 6 times. It has also numerous interpretations of the Library Bill of Rights that focus on specific, specific instances you might find yourselves in a library. So there's one specifically to children's computer access, meeting rooms, etc. The Bill of Rights covers diverse collections, meeting rooms, privacy, and it has 6 pretty straightforward statements of basic principles that should govern all library services. But then in 2019, a 7th amendment was added, which was fairly controversial at the time. So most libraries will formally adopt the Library Bill of Rights as part of their library policies. I think this is a really excellent practice. I encourage your board to do this, to have it included in your policy statements. And I'm not gonna lie, I initially tried to make this entire presentation so that each article of the Bill of Rights was a different important library value, and that just didn't work at all. So again, we're gonna start out really text heavy. So the first article of the Library Bill of Rights reads, "Books and other library resources should be provided for the interest, information, and enlightenment of all people of the community the library serves. Materials should not be excluded because of origin, age, background, or views of those contributing to their creation." This is generally read to encompass the importance of intellectual freedom, and it is a really good partner with the second article, which reads, "Libraries should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historical issues. Materials should not be prescribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval." So I want to go through what these 2 articles have in common because I found this really interesting. So in both of them, they have, in their first sentences, they emphasize that library materials should be for everybody and contain all points of view. So this is really important because it says that you should be looking at your collection and making sure that it's well-rounded, includes multiple viewpoints, and also be up to date on new topics of interest. And then the second sentence of both of these articles are super similar. So the first article says, Materials should not be excluded because of origin, age, background, or views of those contributing to their creation. The second article follows that up with materials shouldn't be added or removed because of personal beliefs like politics or religion. So I think these two partner together really well. So the really great thing is that they maintain that a librarian's personal opinions and beliefs should remain independent of the professional values of the library or the board in your case. If an item is challenged, if it comes before the board, somebody saying, I would like this removed from the library, it doesn't belong here. As a trustee that values your library, you should also value the information of the community to read the items that they choose, even if you personally disagree with them. It's also really important to understand that these items, as they relate to acquisition of library materials and your collection development policies. So the library director and staff are empowered to follow these articles, but it's up to you as board members and trustees to make sure that the staff are serving the needs of the entire community through their work. The third article of the Library Bill of Rights reads, libraries should challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibility to provide information and enlightenment. So as a library board, it's your responsibility to challenge censorship in all forms, including having items in the collection, but then also databases, programming, and then making sure that your policies aren't prohibitive to specific groups of people. The fourth article, libraries should cooperate with all persons and groups concerned with resisting abridgment of free expression and free access to ideas. And then the fifth article we really keep hammering that point about libraries and neutrality. A person's right to use a library should not be denied or abridged because of their origin, age, background, or views. Sixth article I've been reading a lot about lately. Libraries which make exhibit spaces and meeting rooms available to the public they serve should make such facilities available on an equitable basis, regardless of the beliefs or affiliations of individuals or groups requesting their use. And then last but not least, this is the seventh article that just came out 2 years ago. All people, regardless of origin, age, background, or views, possess a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. Libraries should advocate for, educate about, and protect people's privacy, safeguarding all library use data, including personally identifiable information. I'm sorry that I just read to you the entire library Bill of Rights. But these really are like the foundation of librarianship as most libraries understand them. And I think that they're really important, not only for librarians to understand, but for you as a trustee, so that you guys are all on the same page. As a board member, you're being asked to uphold these values in policy creation, planning, and your advocacy efforts. But you're also expected to support the library director and staff in their roles as they strive to provide equitable services as well. Again, you are a team, and it's important that you come into this from that standpoint. Okay, so I do want to do a deep dive into some of this. So first up is intellectual freedom, and I'm going to push play and hope that you can hear this. Oh.
The term intellectual freedom sounds like a complicated foreign concept, and it can be. But at its core, intellectual freedom is something that affects everyone every day. Intellectual freedom can also be complicated, but that's what this video is for. This video will cover the basics, what intellectual freedom is, and why it is important. So let's get started. What is intellectual freedom anyway? The American Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Manual describes it as the right of every individual to both seek and receive information from all points of view without restriction. Complex, right? Well, in more casual terms, that means that when you go to the library and ask for information about a topic, they shouldn't provide biased information. For example, if you went to your local library to ask for information about legalizing marijuana and only received information about why it shouldn't be legal, you would probably feel like you were missing half the story, right? Intellectual freedom is the ethical principle that everyone should receive good information that covers the different points of view. This then lets each person make an educated decision for themselves. In our marijuana example, it would be difficult to make informed opinions and choices if you were only presented with one side. It's intellectual freedom that is the reason that everyone should be provided with all the sides of the information they request and need. Not complicated, right? Now, you may be wondering, why is intellectual freedom important? Why should you care? This one should be a little easier now that we understand the basic premise of intellectual freedom. It is vital to the democratic process. It would be hard to make an informed choice about political candidates, controversial issues, current events, and more if you're only receiving information about one side of the argument. Getting high-quality information that presents multiple viewpoints is necessary to making informed decisions. As the Intellectual Freedom Manual states, intellectual freedom empowers young people to make smart decisions and solve real-world problems. Intellectual freedom also includes library collections. Beyond just getting information that has multiple points of view when you ask questions, there should also be books and materials at the library for browsing and checking out that contain multiple viewpoints available to everyone. The need for intellectual freedom in libraries extends past the answers to specific questions and into fiction and nonfiction materials for all ages. It is important that when you go to browse for a fun reading fiction book, that the books are representative of different people, cultures, and experiences. We often use books as a way to experience things that are different. Think about how boring it would be if all the books on the shelf only were about one type of experience. A girl in the suburbs who likes basketball. Intellectual freedom creates collections with diversity, so you can find the basketball books, but also space aliens and people who don't even look or live like you. Intellectual freedom extends outside of the library into every part of your everyday life. Intellectual freedom protects not only your right to learn and hear about all sides of an issue, but also to voice your opinion on issues as well. Intellectual freedom helps each person to be able to make well-informed decisions about social issues, political candidates, even which refrigerator to buy.
All right. So, as they talk about in that video, intellectual freedom is important to library collections and services in order for all patrons to be equally supported. Everybody has the right to see this bigger picture, right? So you'll notice the emphasis on the enlightenment of all people of the community the library serves. So this means the right to intellectual freedom should not be deterred by age, gender, political views, any of those things. The American Library Association really believes that intellectual freedom is the foundation to our democracy as all Americans, and that everyone has the right to form their own opinions about topics, and the only way to do that is to freely research them. Some of the most common intellectual freedom questions I get from libraries that I work with have to do with restricting access to library resources. So this is usually books, movies with an R or PG-13 rating. But sometimes it has to do with like internet access and filtering. So internet or intellectual freedom isn't always as black and white as I've probably made it sound. There are areas that are very hotly debated amongst librarians. And I'll touch on those a little bit. But in general, the default position of the library is we don't want to censor this information. You can have access to it. So the companion piece to intellectual freedom really is censorship. So the official definition of censorship is the suppression of ideas and information that certain persons find objectionable or dangerous. Censors pressure public institutions to suppress and remove information they judge inappropriate or dangerous from public access so that no one else has the chance to read or view the material and make up their own minds about it. Again, American Library Association has many views on this, including the freedom to read and freedom to view statements that are in our LibGuide. But to summarize, they do exactly what their titles suggest. They outline the rights of people to freely view or read any materials they would like to without infringement by the library. When somebody tries to limit their access to information, that person is being a censor. I'm sure you've all heard of Banned Books or Banned Books Week. This is the week where librarians celebrate the books that are really often challenged by community members to be removed from their shelves. Some of the books on that list that I personally find surprising are Captain Underpants, The Hunger Games, and To Kill a Mockingbird. Censors argue that books are inappropriate for children. Oftentimes, they say they romanticize violence, sex, or other views that they personally find immoral. But libraries are going to celebrate that right of all ages to read books about these topics and draw their own opinions from them. Censorship can go beyond the scope of library materials and include your library programs. In recent years, and actually in the legislature a couple weeks ago, libraries have been discussing drag queen story times. So just and then displays that include information on like the Black Lives Matter movement and bringing in speakers to hold open forums about racial justice and LGBT issues. These have all come up already this year in 2021. In the past like 6 weeks, these have all come up as areas of censorship against libraries. So to be prepared for all of this, right? If your library is doing something and somebody wants to start censoring it, your library needs to be proactive and not reactive. So I would encourage you to have a reconsideration of materials or programs policy, and then also make sure that you've adopted your freedom to read and view statements and the Library Bill of Rights as a part of your policies. One thing that is unfortunate is that censorship doesn't always occur at the hands of patrons saying that they don't want somebody to have access to this, but that librarians, board members, any staff can also be really guilty of censorship. So this might look like not purchasing materials because the cover artwork looks a little racy and might upset a big donor, or it contains politically controversial opinions, or I've had libraries admit to me that they have not purchased materials with minority main characters because they don't think that they will be read and it's not a good use of their money. Sometimes it can look like limiting access to meeting rooms on an equitable basis. Like a library might choose not to allow LGBT support group in their meeting rooms, but they're going to allow a Bible study. And it's so making sure that you have some sort of policy to make sure that people are being treated without this discrimination. So as board members, again, it's your responsibility to make sure that your library policies and practices don't censor information or access to any of your patrons. There's a really good checklist, again, in my LibGuide that kind of goes through to see if you are actually censoring something. But really strong collection development policies, library use policy, internet access policies that are crafted and approved by the board. They will all help support your staff that purchase the materials that might be considered inappropriate by some or that are controversial. And they help your staff support patrons that are trying to access content from all sides of the ideological spectrum. Okay, I do want to talk about Something that's really come to light in the past few years, equity, diversity, and inclusion, often shortened to EDI or DEI. There are entire degree programs and multi-day trainings and webinars out the ears to about this. And so I am by no means doing this topic justice on one slide. But I think it's important just to kind of give you some brief highlights because it is really relevant to your role as a board member. And one of those things is equitable treatment and access for anybody that walks into your library. So I really like this image. I always have. It shows us the difference between equality and equity. So as you know, equality means treating everybody completely the same, regardless of their personal circumstances. But that means if the library policies require that all patrons show a photo ID to receive a library card, by default, children wouldn't be able to have a library card unless they have some sort of school ID or until they can get a resident card or driver's permit or something. But most libraries that I know of are going to make exceptions for kids. And that's being equitable, not equal, but equitable, recognizing that not everybody is starting from the same place, but your library is making accommodations for that. So this is where intellectual freedom and censorship and equal rights gets semi-controversial, because I'm just going to ask some questions on the next slide that I don't have answers to, but they're questions that might be brought to the library board. And I think that they're worthy of conversation amongst boards members and the library director, and honestly, just amongst librarians. So first up, are libraries neutral spaces? A lot of people are going to default and just say, yes, of course. But then you have to think, if libraries are truly neutral, what does that mean? It might mean that libraries need to equally respect and provide equal access to hateful rhetoric and resources about white supremacy. Some people would say that the library should not allow racist materials on the shelves unless there's a disclaimer about only providing them for historical context. But that can also be called censorship. So where does your library fall on this issue? When we talk about equity, we want to talk about patrons not feeling welcome and safe at the library. Would a Black person, Native American, feel welcome at a library that has multiple books supporting their suppression on their shelves in the name of free speech? Whose rights are more valued and whose rights would win out? Another case, can patrons access porn on a library computer? What about their personal computers using the library's Wi-Fi? Is there a difference if it's pictures or video? Sound on, sound off? How does the library know what a person is doing on the computer in the first place? These are all think pieces in library master's programs. ALA's official statement says that all internet filtration is censorship. So in theory, they would say porn in the library is acceptable. But your board may feel differently because the optics of using tax-supported resources to access some content that some people find objectionable looks bad. But I would argue that there's also additional issues of computer surveillance going on. So these are only 2 questions, but I think that they're a really good starting point to talk about amongst other board members. You can look at your policies and see where they might not be completely equitable. I'm really, really happy to have conversations about these, but there is no true right or wrong answer. It's not black or white. Everybody's going to come down differently. Okay, so as I just kind of alluded to with our pornography example, libraries have run into censorship claims when it comes to using filters on public access computers and Wi-Fi. If your library is a part of the E-rate consortium in North Dakota, you might be required to have a basic filter on your public internet to comply with SIPA, or the Children's Internet Protection Act. SIPA was enacted in Congress in 2000 to address concerns about children's access to obscene or harmful content on the internet. And then it includes requirements for policies about protecting children's privacy. So again, sounds really great. Everybody's going to say, let's protect the children. But there are larger censorship issues when it comes to internet filtering, because filtering by default is limiting access to information, which is censorship. So filters block access for casual and academic research and inquiry for adults and children, especially in most small libraries where they share computers. Most filters can be lifted by a librarian, but then the librarian needs to ask a patron the reason for their search. And that's a major breach of privacy that can make people uncomfortable sharing. Choosing to filter the library's internet should be a series of conversations, again, between the board and the director, but it should absolutely not be a proxy for having other strong policies. If the library board is really concerned about people spending too much time on YouTube, you don't need to immediately go and block YouTube. The board would need to examine if that's just a problem, like if that is actively causing a problem in your library. Is there too much of a wait time on the computer, or are you just biased about somebody spending 4 hours a day on YouTube? An issue like this could be addressed by amending your computer use policy to require the use of headphones or changing the time limit on computers. This isn't a made-up example. I've had several libraries call me about trying to change their filters to block YouTube. I have really strong opinions on that. But again, another time. And let's see here. So the Library Bill of Rights addresses directly the issue of privacy and confidentiality in the library. So Article 7, which was added again 2 years ago, specifically says all people possess a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. So this includes if they are the library, the items they check out, what they use the computer for, and their personal information. To back this up, there is actually a piece in Century Code that protects the privacy of library users. 403812 reads, any record maintained or received by a library receiving public funds, which provides a library patron's name or information sufficient to identify a patron together with the subject about which the patron requested information, is considered private and is accepted from the public records disclosure requirement of Section 440418. These records may be released when required pursuant to a court order or a subpoena. I'm sorry, we did talk about library law. I forgot that. Anyways, so both of these things show how important it is for all library users to use the resources free of surveillance. I have the right to go into my local public library here in Bismarck and check about books about a medical condition, or to use a library computer to look up architectural renderings of a conference center without being monitored. I think that's really, really powerful to have that freedom. But this can come back to issues with patron privacy and what that looks like in your policies. So should the library keep track of what books a patron has recently checked out or where they are in a series? I would say no, but that's my opinion. What if a parent asks which books their preteen has checked out? Again, best practices are going to say no. The library should not release these records to a parent or anybody without a court order in order to respect the privacy of their users. But again, we can get a little deeper here with some other questions. Should the library monitor what patrons are using the computer for by installing software to look at their screen while they're sitting at the reference desk? How does your library feel about security cameras? Are they truly necessary? What are they acting in proxy for? Who has access to the camera footage? The increasing surveillance of library patrons has been shown to decrease patron engagement in libraries and adversely affect minority populations. So before you adopt any surveillance technologies in your library, I want you to please ask yourself the true purpose of the equipment and how it is affecting your user's experience. Many surveillance tactics can be addressed through library policy and patron and staff education. Regardless of your feelings on this issue, just remember that the board is responsible to make sure that patrons and their information is protected. So you need to have that separation of personal values and professional values. And then my very last true slide of information today is the library as a public space. So the library is a space that is completely free to taxpayers, which are very far and few between these days. So what this means for you, again, really comes down to policy development for how to use library meeting rooms and library space. Since the library is tax funded, Century Code 403807 reads, "Every library and reading room shall be free for the use of inhabitants of the political subdivision where it is located." So this would include meeting rooms. The Library Bill of Rights believes that these should be distributed on an equitable basis, regardless of beliefs or affiliations of individuals or groups requesting their use. After a lot of controversy 2 years ago, ALA said that this does not extend to hate groups. So your library is not, I guess, guided to extend the use of your meeting rooms to hate groups. When you're drafting these policies surrounding the library's meeting rooms, I again want to ask all board members, can you be a little introspective and say, how can we best use this space as it was intended in the library? And how can we be a good steward of the tax dollars that we've been entrusted with? Okay, here are my last series of questions that can help prompt some conversation for you at your next board meeting. Can nonprofit groups like a Bible study, tutoring, or Girl Scouts use your meeting rooms? What about for-profit groups like a sales representative? Do meetings in your meeting rooms need to be open to the public, or can they be used for private groups like a bridal shower? How does that look when a tutoring session is arguably a private occurrence? Can users bring in food and drink, candles? Again, it all comes down on how you draft your policies, but I really want to emphasize that libraries are meant to be used by your community members, and the board gets to choose exactly how that facility is used. So again, that's kind of my brief librarianship ethics 101. If there are any questions, I'm happy to tackle them, but as I've said, a lot of this is kind of subject to local practices and what you and your board decide. I can't give you a strong yes or no on a lot of things. Here's all of our contact information. I'm Abby, my boss is Carmen. She's the Library Services Division Director, and then State Librarian Mary Susie.